Hello, thank you for joining the webinar today. We'll be covering creating a winning A/B testing strategy with Google Optimize. The recording will be available afterwards on our website, and we'll also have time for questions at the end. So you can add your questions to the panel and go to webinar, and I'll try to get to all of those at the end. My contact info will also be provided for anyone who would like to reach out for additional questions after the webinar. So let's get started. My name is Melanie Bowles, and I'm an optimization and insight specialist with InfoTrust. I work with some of the largest brands in the world to define and execute experimentation strategies. InfoTrust is an independent analytics consultancy and product development company. We're Google partners, headquartered in Cincinnati, Ohio, and have offices in Chicago, Barcelona, and Dubai. We offer a full stack of services from data compliance and security, technical implementation and support, reporting and insights, as well as digital analytics strategy and data science. And here's what we're going to cover today. I'm going to tell you how to create a winning A/B testing strategy and how to do it using Google Optimize. We'll talk about starting with the right tool for your organization, in this case, Google Optimize, and following a documented process to build, review, and deploy your tests. So let's jump right into it. We're going to talk first about starting with the right tool. So how do you choose the right tool for your organization? There are a number of factors to consider, but here are just a few. Price. Of course, price is important when making a decision about A/B testing tool. Can you afford this A/B testing tool? Is there a demo available for you to try the tool before you invest in it or before you install it on your whole site? How easy is it to install on your site? Is it going to require a lot of development resources just to get the tool up and running to even try it? What integrations are important to you and your team, and does this tool have those integrations? You may be interested in support, especially if you're new to A/B testing. So how easy is it to reach out to a person and get some support when you need it? And then finally, how important is the methodology to you? There's a number of different methodologies available in various A/B testing tools. If you already have a preference when it comes to statistical methodology, that's definitely something to consider as well. So why choose Google Optimize? Let's go through some of those factors I just covered for Google Optimize. There are free and enterprise versions available for Google Optimize. So that also gives you the ability to try it for free before you decide if you need to upgrade to a 360 version of Google Optimize. It's easy to install with a snippet, which I'll show some examples of several of these factors here in a moment. There's native integrations with Google Analytics and Google Ads. So if your current analytics platform is Google Analytics, that integration is already available for you for building tests. There's several options for support, including an extensive help center with documentation, an optimized community where you can post in forums and get advice and support from other users that are actively working through Optimize, and then Google Optimize partners like InfoTrust. Google Optimize also uses a Bayesian methodology. If that's something that you're interested in, we can definitely share a little bit of information about that methodology, but it's definitely a much larger conversation. So like I said, there's a free and a 360 version of Optimize 360. So there's a few differences there. So in terms of testing capabilities, they both have the same capabilities where you can use A/B multivariate redirect testing options, as well as personalization. In terms of simultaneous experiments, with the free version, you are limited to running 5 experiments at a time. And with the 360 version, you can run many more experiments at a time than that. In terms of targeting, there are some differences between the free and the 360 version. The 360 version also gives you the ability to target users in Google Analytics audiences that you've built. Both versions have a number of advanced targeting options, including geolocation, URL, AdWords traffic, JavaScript variables, data variables, etc. So we will review some of those in some point later in this presentation. Experiment objectives and reporting. With the free version, you are limited to some pre-selected objectives or custom objectives, usually 3 per experiment. But with 360, you have the ability to select many objectives for reporting. Even after the experiment begins, you can view those objectives. The free version has that help center and forum-based support that I mentioned. And then the 360 version also comes with additional product SLAs and dedicated account management and technical support with a partner. To set up, optimize, or create an account, it's very easy. You just create a new, go to the Optimize website, you create a new account and link it to your Google Analytics property. You select any views that you plan to use with that property, and then install the Chrome extension if you plan on using the visual editor. So we'll talk more about the visual editor a little bit later, but these are the steps that you take just to set up the free optimized container. To install it on your website, you have a number of options available and extensive documentation on the steps to install it. So you would either use the global site tag or G tag, or you can also deploy the optimized snippet directly through Google Tag Manager. So screenshots there to give you some examples on how to do that with either the snippet or through GTM. And like I said, the optimized methodology that's used is a Bayesian inference model, which generates predicted outcomes as opposed to the frequentist-based analysis used by many other testing tools. So with Bayesian, it's a degree of belief expressed as a probability that results should change rationally to account for availability of related evidence. So it's a mouthful, but essentially prior data can be used to make decisions in the Google Optimized methodology using a number of different models. There's a lot of information in the Google Optimized help articles about the methodology that's used. Well, let's dive into talking about setting up a documented process. So in terms of developing a process, A/B testing generally follows kind of a cycle. So let's consider how those steps kind of play into your strategy, those stages of A/B testing. Generally, you start with understanding your KPIs, the KPIs that you want to improve, and come up with test ideas based on those metrics. So moving into test prioritization, this is where you've already come up with your test ideas. You have a big list of tests, and you need to apply some type of methodology to decide which tests are most important and when those tests should run. Finally, or not finally, but next, moving into test implementation, understanding what factors are in play when it comes to implementation. Are there on-site changes that you need to make? Can you develop this test exclusively within your A/B testing tool? And then moving into report development once you have run your test, and finally making decisions and taking action. So how does this translate into a process and a strategy? So first, we're going to talk about understanding who to include and when, and what types of deliverables they should be involved in. So based on the process steps that we just reviewed, you might want to start by mapping those people or departments into each step. So if you have established the steps that are required for getting up and running with an A/B testing or an A/B test, you map into those steps each of the departments that should be involved. You may not have all of these departments, but at least the functionality that these people represent should be accounted for. And of course, this is subjective. You may not think that everybody here needs to be involved, but it's just an example. So making sure that when you're initially developing the KPIs, that you're involving the right people that have experience with that data, or at least access to that data to start formulating the KPIs. Test ideation, everybody may not be involved in that step, but make sure you're including the right people there. Same thing with test prioritization. Implementation also should usually involve quite a few people, just making sure that the test looks the way you expect, that you've run some QA on the test before you push it live on your site, and understand the implications of any changes that you're making on your site. Finally, you develop your reports, and notice that when it comes to review of insights, we're definitely recommending involving as many people as possible. So you make sure that you're using your data to kind of de-silo your departments, and making sure that when you run a test, everybody has a clear understanding of what happened in the test, what the outcomes were, and what the next steps are. So involving the right people also means establishing the deliverables needed and who should be involved with the creation of those deliverables. So here's some examples of deliverables you may need to develop a winning A/B testing strategy. So at a minimum, we would definitely recommend prioritizing your tests into a test queue that people have access to. This will give everybody a single point of truth in terms of all of the tests that you have planned and what their priority level is. A test brief is definitely important as well, to give people a summary of what the test is, what the changes will be made, when this test may run, and why you're running it. So that would include a purpose of the test, a hypothesis, what your objectives are, and essentially just giving everybody a heads up that you're going to be running some type of test on the site. A test report obviously needs to be created to really deploy those insights. So once you run your test, distill and deploy those insights into some type of deliverable that makes it easy for people in different departments to get a summary of what happened. You may also want to have a QA checklist on hand, so every time you run a test, you go through a specific process to make sure that test is ready to run. Quarterly reviews of your tests and how those are running, and then finally maybe some type of summary test report that just gives a quick summary of all of the tests that you've run, and or a dashboard that reviews those. So again, test brief, elements that may go into a test brief, purpose, hypothesis, objectives, descriptions and examples of the variants, including screenshots, your weighting requirements, scheduling, all of those things may be included in a test brief to give different departments a heads up. And then finally, the test report, key results, issues, recommendations, related tests. These are all factors that you would want to consider in a test report and share with multiple teams or multiple members of your teams. So next we'll talk about how do you come up with test ideas. So when it comes to generating test ideas, you should start with the data that shows those objectives in need of improvement. So of course, since we're talking about Google Optimize, one of the main data sources that you're going to want to look at is your Google Analytics data. So this is where you can get some key objectives to work on for each of your A/B tests. You can also look at other data sources that you may be using. If you have a UX team that's done some type of heuristic frameworks or analysis, user feedback and surveys are good places to look for ideas on customer frustrations, heat maps, and user recordings as well. But like I said, Google Analytics data should be your main source of data when you're starting to work through building a strategy for a test to create. So if you're using Google Analytics, this data can be used to find the pages and features that need optimization. So if you have implemented tracking and customized your tracking based on your organizational needs, there's a number of things you can look at. Bounce rate sometimes can be used as a way to measure performance of different types of pages. If you're site is engaged in e-commerce, abandonment of the funnel is a good place to look. Event tracking. So if you've set up any custom events in Google Analytics, these events are available to you in Google Optimize to use as objectives. So if you have forms or email subscriptions, finders, quizzes, store locators, all of those things could be set as objectives in your tests. And of course, based on all of this custom tracking that you have, you can also segment by device category, traffic source, country, and region. Any of the dimensions that you can segment by in Google Analytics are good places to drill down and look for opportunities for improvement. And we'll talk about how you can actually set your objectives up in Google Optimize using these events and metrics. So once you've taken the time to go through your data and decide what tests you want to run, you need to apply some type of model to prioritize your tests. There's a number of models that are available or used for prioritizing your tests. Some of the models that you may have heard of or you could research are the CXL's PXL framework, P.I.E method. There's a number of other methods available if you want to get more advanced in the way you choose or prioritize those tests. That's up to you. One of the methods that we use quite frequently that is relatively simple is the P.I.E method. So P.I.E stands for potential, importance, and ease. So essentially, you generate your list of tests and you apply your relative assignment of the potential, importance, and ease for each test, and then take an average to get that P.I.E score. So potential comes from your data sources. So when you look at web analytics or your heuristic analysis or voice of customer data, how much potential for improvement is there? How much of an improvement can be made on those KPIs? Importance, how important is this page or this element to your site or your conversions? This could be in relation to cost, traffic volume, your return on investment for those particular elements or pages, but generally how important it is to your site performance. And then finally, ease. How easy will it be for you to actually make this change for the purpose of testing and for the purpose of actually making that change on your site? So this could be technical, this could be political within your organization, but it's definitely an important factor to consider when prioritizing your tests. And then the next step of your strategy is implementation. So this is where we really get into Google Optimize. You've brainstormed your test, you've prioritized your tests, and now we're going to talk about how you actually build those experiences within Google Optimize. So if you're using Google Optimize, we're already assuming that you're using Google Analytics as your primary web analytics tool. So you go into Google Optimize and you can create an experience. Like I said earlier, there's a number of types of experiences you can create: A/B test, multivariate, redirect, or personalization. In this case, we're just going to talk about A/B testing, where you just go in, you name your experience and assign the site, and then you start adding your variants. So it's very intuitive to interface. Essentially, once you create your experience and then you add a variant, you start making your site changes. So these site changes can be made using the Optimize Visual Editor for A/B tests and personalizations. If you choose a redirect test, it's a little bit different because you'll just redirect users based on your split to a different web page on your domain altogether. But essentially, you add those variants and click Edit, and you'll get that kind of drag and drop editor that gives you ability to point and click and change the elements that you want to change. You can also use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript if you're going to be making some more advanced changes as well. In terms of targeting, Targeting is broken down by page targeting and audience targeting. So for page targeting, that determines where on your site the experiment should run. So there's a number of matching criteria that you can set. You can use the URL, you can use the page path, you can even use the hashtag and select it should match or not match or match or start with. There's all types of match options that you can use for the page targeting. Audience targeting is where you can really get specific. So this determines who should see your experience. So if you've done a test brief, you should already have defined who you want to be exposed to this experience. So maybe you want to only target users on a mobile device. You can select the device category targeting. Or if you only want to target users in the US, you can select the geography targeting and assign the country to United States. All of these features are available with the free version. If you upgrade to Optimize 360, you can also access the Google Analytics Audiences feature. So if you have an audience strategy that you've built out in Google Analytics, maybe to utilize with Google Ads even, you can access those audiences directly. So really great integration and feature of Google Optimize. Of course, you can also target other elements like the browser or operating system that users are on when they visit your site, and more advanced audience targeting options like query parameters. So if you have query parameters in your URL, like UTM codes, you can use that to target users from specific campaigns. Also, if you have a data layer built out to enhance your Google Analytics implementation, you can target anything in the data layer for targeting users. And then defining objectives and objective types. Like I said, if you have been using Google Analytics as your primary web analytics tool, all of your objectives are available to you from Google Analytics and Google Optimize. So you can either choose from a list with system objectives or Google Analytics goals, or you can create custom objectives. If you choose system objectives, these are the objectives that are built in. They're common built-in objectives that are frequently used in experiments. So if this data exists in your Google Analytics linked property, this will be available to you to select as an objective for your test. So bounces, page views, revenue, session duration, and transactions. Those will automatically show up for you without any additional setup. If you have goals set up for your linked property and view, those will also be available to you to set as objectives for your tests. So anything that you can set up in Google Analytics will port over to your Google Optimize account for that purpose. And then finally, custom objectives. If you have set up custom events on your site, so that means anything that has a category, action, and label, you can also create a custom objective for Google Optimize as well. So similar to the URL matching, you can also match any of your events in the Google Optimize interface. And it's very similar to creating a goal in Google Analytics, where you'll also get some rule validation based on the objective that you set up. So based on the last 7 days of data in the linked Google Analytics view, you'll see how many times this objective or this rule was true. So in addition to events, also similar to Google Analytics goals, you can also set an objective type of page view. So if you have a confirmation page for registration or a confirmation page for a transaction, you can also set that as your objective, that a user needs to reach this page for it to be considered a conversion. And then finally, once you've established your targeting rules, you've built your objectives, you just launch your test. You have the option to either start the experiment right away or schedule the experiment. So the schedule experiment option is great when you know the date that this needs to end, or you know the date that this needs to start, to make sure that your test aligns with any other marketing campaigns and objectives that you have. So you just select either a start time and end time, or both, or either or. You don't have to select all of these elements. So we've talked through the steps of mapping different departments into different functions of creating an A/B testing strategy. We've talked about building the tests in Google Optimize. Next, we're going to talk about making decisions. So once you've run your tests, the last step is to really review your data and match that up to what you discussed as your objectives and your hypothesis in your test brief. So understanding, is the hypothesis true, modeled versus observed conversion rates, and if you have qualitative data, pulling that in to support your findings. So in Google Optimize, this is an example of some of the types of data you may see in your reporting interface. So you'll see a quick summary of the test experiment sessions and some advice from Google Optimize based on your results in terms of how you should proceed, whether that be to keep your experiment running, if there's no leader found, if you're still waiting for data, or if there's a variant that is a clear leader. The objective card will give you more details about the results of your tests. So it displays the performance of your variants for each selected objective over time. So in this example on the screen, transactions is selected, so you'll see both the observed data and the modeled outcomes from Google Optimize analysis. So you can actually see what was measured in Google Analytics during your experiment. And then you can also see how Optimize predicts that this will perform if you were to implement one of your variants. So you can see a number of measurements here, like probability to be best or probability to be original if there's more than one variant, as well as your modeled conversion rates and your modeled improvement. So briefly, just to kind of describe those elements of your report, probability to be best would tell you the probability that a given variant performs better than all other variants. The modeled conversion rate would give you the predicted average conversion rate as a range. And then modeled improvement for a given objective is the difference in conversion rate. So measured as a percentage and between the variation and the baseline. This is also known as lift. You may be familiar with this if you're using other tools. And then finally, experiment sessions. So this is all of the sessions that are attributed to the experiment. User attribution and Optimize starts when the experiment is applied and ends when the experiment ends. So I'll tell you all of the sessions in Optimize. And finally, when you've gone through Google Optimize and you've reviewed your results, we definitely recommend distilling and deploying those insights into reports. So this makes it easy to share the results across teams to communicate key learnings, any issues you faced, and next steps. So actually creating a reporting deliverable versus only reviewing your results within the interface is a better way to keep the organization informed. It promotes that culture of experimentation by kind of encouraging people to buy into this whole A/B testing strategy, and also gives you an opportunity to grow and scrutinize any failure for learnings. So if you ran a test and 2 weeks into it, you realize there's something else you could have done or another objective you could have assigned, this is a good way to take it back to the team and find ideas for improvement in future tests. So you may decide that a standard report is best for you. So the example on the right, where you're just kind of summarizing a number of elements, experiments, description, hypothesis, and some of the key results and key learnings. You may also decide to use a dashboard in tandem with a report to give even quicker access to people in different departments. So a lot of people want to know how these tests turn out. This will give them an opportunity whenever they're ready to kind of log in and see results for different A/B tests that you could have been running. So those are some different options for deploying and distilling those insights into kind of bite-sized content or bite-sized reports that people can help use to make decisions. Okay, well, that covered everything, so we have time for questions. So one of the questions that I see is that, or what will be an easiest way to run an A/B test by adding a simple CTA? So with Google Optimize, that is actually pretty simple in the interface. You can just go into the visual editor and select, if maybe it's a button or a header item, and click to edit that item. And then you can change the color, you can change the text. All of those are available as kind of simple changes you can make through the Google Optimize interface. So definitely try the free version of Google Optimize, and you can start, playing around with some of those changes you can make on your site. Does my marketing team have to have Analytics 360 to use Optimize 360? No, actually you don't. You can utilize Optimize 360 even if you're not a Google Analytics 360 customer. Okay, a number of people said that they lost audio. Sorry again about that. Why isn't SEO included in the ideation step? As an SEO, we'd love more visibility and inclusion when it comes to A/B testing. So that was just a recommendation. I actually have heard that feedback before, that SEO teams do want to be more involved with A/B testing, and that's just really kind of an eye-opening opportunity, because so frequently people only include UX teams when it comes to A/B testing. So it's definitely a good point. Any team that you have that may have some input or feedback on A/B testing definitely should be informed about any tests that you're going to run, because it is possible that those changes could affect SEO short-term and long-term. Can I have the test brief example in a doc format? Actually, yes, we can probably share it as maybe a Google Doc as an attachment as well. What is the minimum traffic to make an A/B test on a page? So that isn't a hard, fast number. That kind of depends on how big of a change the variant is in terms of conversions. So the good thing about Bayesian inference, which is the model that Google Optimize uses, is that you don't necessarily have to have millions of users or page views to get some statistically significant results. So when you're using Google Optimize and you run the test, we definitely recommend running any test for at least 2 weeks. After that, Google Optimize will give you more definitive recommendations in terms of how long, or if you should continue running the test, or if there's a winning variant. So I'm looking through some more questions. Sorry, lots of questions about the audio going out. A big issue we usually have with our dev team when figuring out whether to add new tools is how heavy the code will be on our website. Will Google Optimize's code decrease our site speed in any way? So anytime you add another tag to your site, it is possible that it could slightly increase page load time. So we definitely recommend when you implement Google Optimize that you test just to see what the actual impact is on your site. We also recommend utilizing what's called the anti-flicker snippet, which is another element that is optional but recommended that you can place on your site. So essentially, a lot of A/B testing tools have an issue where, depending on your implementation, you may see a second where the page flickers until the variant is loaded. So utilizing this snippet helps ensure that users don't see that flicker and that the page loads as quickly as possible with the actual variant, so there's not that latency. Is it possible to limit the number of times a user sees a test? So this is not built in directly, but it is possible with targeting, with some of the advanced targeting options. That would definitely require probably a little bit of custom coding or use of a first-party cookie where you could limit that, but generally we recommend not doing that just because I don't know that the methodology would account for that necessarily. So you could kind of cap what users see based on the targeting rules for users or the amount of time that you run the test. How long should tests run, or is there a max length? So tests should run until you get results that are either significant or Google Optimize determines that a clear winner probably will not be found. So we recommend at least 2 weeks. I know many tests get significant results within 2 weeks. You may choose to run your test longer if you just want to kind of see how things may change over time, or if you're getting closer, you have some results, but you just want to see if they become a little bit more clear over time. But generally, at least 2 weeks. There's not a max length necessarily. I've unfortunately seen people just keep running tests indefinitely, but you can definitely make your own call on how long you want to run a test before you decide to deploy it on your site. All right. Is there a minimum number of conversions per variant required? So no, there's not a minimum number of conversions per variant required. This all goes back to using the Bayesian methodology. But again, Google Optimize will notify you, even if you don't have a ton of traffic, when some significant results have been detected. So when you log in and you look at your reporting, you'll see in the header what Google Optimize says as of right now in terms of where the results stand. Is there a clear leader? Is data still being collected? No clear winner is predicted. You don't have to worry too much about determining how many conversions or things like that, because Google Optimize will do that for you. And we will be sharing the recording. And we will be giving access to the slides as well. I know there's probably some time where nothing was being shown on the screen and I lost my connection. So we'll share that, and definitely if anybody has questions, we're available if you want us to reach out to you. And I'm looking through, there's lots of questions. If I want to change a landing page form registration for an online scheduling widget, should I run an A/B test or a split test? So deciding between an A/B test and a split test really depends on how much of a change you want to make. So if you run an A/B test, the changes that you make would be within the Google Optimize visual editor. And there are a lot of changes you can make within the editor. However, if you are making big changes that you'd rather do directly within your CMS, a split test may be a better option. So an example of this, if your site is an e-commerce site and you want to completely change like a step of your checkout flow or checkout process, that would be something that you may want to redirect rather than build within the optimized interface, just because of the level of advanced coding that might be required. That's where we may recommend a split test when it's a big change. How do you tackle Flickr when setting up a test? Again, Google Optimize also has a snippet called the anti-Flickr snippet, and it is customizable. So you may start with the snippet with the default settings. You can also adjust the snippet to meet your needs if you're still seeing Flickr with the default snippet. So you can change the amount of time where that page is being hidden until it fully loads. Can you update HTML for the entire page or just portions based on what you can click on in the visual editor? There is a HTML editor option. You can click around and select. You can use the CSS selector as well to define what you want to make HTML changes on. So there are definitely options for customization. Somebody said they added the anti-Flickr snippet and it made the Flickr worse. How do you fix the Flickr or delay for Google Optimize? So like I said, there are ways to customize your snippet to make sure it works for your site. There are help articles in the Google Optimize resource hub about customizing your Flickr snippet, so or your anti-Flickr snippet. So the Optimize resource hub is support.google.com/optimize, or just Google, of course, Optimize resource hub and search for the anti-Flickr snippet if you want to customize that. Can you create a CTA button in an optimized variant and track click events on that? It is possible. You can create elements that definitely will require some custom coding to create a button within the Google Optimize interface. Tracking click events is possible as well. And that really depends on how you've implemented those types of events throughout your site, but you can also inject custom JavaScript on elements as well, so including those on-click events. Lots of questions about anti-Flickr snippet. Hopefully I've covered most of those questions. What is the best method to put new events by code or GTM? Hopefully the elements, in a lot of cases, the elements that you're testing in an A/B testing environment would be things that are already on your site. But if you are creating a completely new element in Optimize, you'd have to add some additional coding for that new element. But if you're comparing it to an original that doesn't have that variant, the place that you would want to look for that data would be in Google Analytics rather than Optimize, since there's not going to be any comparison if it's a new feature. And I think I've reached the end of the questions. So last but not least, first of all, thank you for joining the webinar, and thank you for staying. A lot of you are still sticking around for the questions, but just want to share another upcoming webinar that is how Google's new approach to cookies affects your marketing strategy. So this webinar will be on February 20th. It's very timely and very relevant. So if you join this webinar, you'll learn more about how Google's changes in its approach to third-party cookies may affect your marketing. So Tag Governance Specialist Lucas Long will provide a detailed overview on the shift and explain, excuse me, how your organization can take steps now to prepare for these changes that Google is making. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining the webinar and for being patient with our technical issues. This concludes the webinar. We'll definitely put the video up as well on our website. Thank you.